If you're not listening to the podcast Sci-Fi Talk, you should be. Host Tony Tellado brings you original interviews and news from throughout not just science fiction, but horror and fantasy as well, in all their forms: television, films, video games, and comic books. Tony's a big Star Trek fan, and he and I sat down to discuss host to host the franchise, plus an array of other topics ranging from podcasting to Sherlock Holmes to PanCan. I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News.
Hello.
Oh, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome to Daily Star Trek News. It seems to me you were podcasting when podcasting first became a thing, near as I can tell. You were right on the cusp. So what
Yeah,
did you do
I
before
did.
that?
Well, actually, I did it as a radio program for a
Okay.
while, which was interesting. And then 2005, somebody mentioned podcast, and then I started covering Star Trek. I covered junkets for Star Trek First Contact, Star Trek Insurrection, and the last Next Generation movie, Star Trek Nemesis.
Oh, wow.
And I've been lucky enough throughout the years to talk to just about, that was always my goal, at least one person from every Star Trek series. And I've been able to do that, including Discovery, Prodigy, and I'm probably missing one of those. But yeah, so I've been able to talk to them. And every Tuesday on my podcast on Sci-Fi Talk, I have Trek Tuesday, where I have interviews with people that have been connected with Star Trek or creating new Star Trek content. And coming up this week, I have F. Murray Abraham. He
Oh,
told me about shooting the finale in Star Trek Insurrection.
that's
It was
cool.
a couple of years ago, which is really cool.
Yeah. And they're all Trek Tuesday is basically all like classic interviews, right? Like you don't generally do new interviews for that. It's all sort of interviews that have been done years ago, sort of a throwback.
It's a mix of both. I have also Jonathan Frakes recently, Mike Mahan from Lower Decks. That's the one I missed. Also D. Bradley Baker from Prodigy.
Oh yeah.
And then I was at the junket for Star Trek Prodigy and talked to Cade and the young actors that are the leads, which is really cool. And Discovery, I was at the bowels of Madison Square Garden interviewing the cast of Discovery during season 2. So that was really cool.
That's
And
really cool.
and actually there is a Star Trek connection of a guest I just interviewed, which is really funny. Wasn't planned, but Beth Grant is in the Mayfair Witches, which I've been covering. And it turns out I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it turns out Lee J. Cobb's daughter, Julie Cobb, lives here as well. Now, if you go back to the original Star Trek series, the episode By Any Other Name, Julie Cobb was in the landing party, and last we saw her, she got turned into a cube and crushed. But she's very much alive. So, and then to make even more interesting, Beth Grant's daughter is Mary Chiefalo, who was the Klingon, of course, in
Yeah.
Star Trek. And if you look at both of them, boy, there's definitely a family resemblance. So she's going to say hi for me to her.
That's
But yeah,
awesome.
so it's really funny.
Yeah, there's Star Trek connections all over the place if you just want to look, right?
Absolutely. You can trip over it literally, especially doing what we do. It's people you talk to that, without Star Trek say, hey, by the way, I was, so anyway, but yeah.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, I just talked to an actor who is one of the prisoners in the Discovery episode and season that she was in the planet where they were going to execute all the prisoners.
Yeah.
She was one of them, and said she had a lovely time with the cast and everything. So she enjoyed it.
That's so cool. So my predecessor Allison had a segment that she called Star Trek Stories, where
Mm.
people would write in their Star Trek story. So everybody's got a Star Trek story. I sort of have a two-part question for you. First of all, your podcast is Sci-Fi Talk. So
Yes.
it's not just Star Trek. It's all
No.
meant sci-fi. So
Mhm.
first of all, what is it that draws you to that genre, the genre of sci-fi, as opposed to other things, mystery or whatever? And second of all, what is your Star Trek story? How did you come to that specific franchise?
Well, starting with my podcast, Sci-Fi Talk, basically, I've always had an interest in these genres. When I was young, I was weaned on the Universal monsters, and that kind of whetted my appetite for horror, those great classic movies. I was able to meet descendants and children of some of my favorite actors, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney Jr., and Bela Lugosi, which was a real thrill. And then comics wise, started watching The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves, and we started reading the comics, and we would sneak underneath the covers and read with a flashlight and read our comics until my parents said, "Stop it." And Star Trek, I was lucky enough to see it when it actually aired on NBC. I missed the first two seasons, but my neighbor told me about it. I started watching season 3, and I've been hooked ever since. And to be able to talk to some of these people, including some of my idols like Leonard Nimoy and Jimmy Doohan, that was a real thrill. And obviously, I treasure those interviews because they're both gone. Leonard talked about his days in theater and starting a theater company, and that was fascinating. You could see his skill in organization, coming out. And they did a play, and with the most speaking parts they could. And also, ironically, Vic Morrow was part of the company at the time.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, when I spoke to him in 2009, he just did the Abrams movie, and he was donating a pair of ears to auction to support the company, which was really neat. But to hear about his theater days was fascinating stuff. And I don't speak too long on this, but I actually went to a production in New York City, and it was actually in the Leonard Nimoy theater of this that he obviously used his influence and money to donate to keep theater going, because obviously it was very passionate for him, and it certainly shows in his portrayal of Spock. What a gentleman and such an artist,
Yeah.
I called him in the interview the Renaissance man of Star Trek because he did so many different things so well. That loss, when your heroes pass away, it hurts, I was watching classic episode last night, Metamorphosis, and it's always, we'll always have that and his wonderful performances. So I'm so glad of that.
Yeah, I'm always happy when I see him in something. He was in a Twilight Zone that I really like, and he's, he was just he was a great, gentle, kind man. So
yeah, absolutely.
That loss was tough.
Yeah, Jimmy too. Jimmy talked about his experiences during World War II to me, and I don't know if people know this, but Jimmy Doohan was missing a finger. It was shot off during D-Day. So if you look at Scotty, Scotty has both all his digits. But if you look at Scotty, he always uses one hand where he has all the fingers, and he would curl into a fist the other hand. If you watch carefully, you'll see that. So this way it doesn't show up on camera, which was really fascinating. When I met him, I was like, I couldn't believe that. But told some great stories, and how he landed a plane. He was a pilot. He landed a plane on the Autobahn in Germany.
I didn't hear that story.
Yeah, they actually called him the crazy Limey, even though he was Canadian. But he was a great guy. And,
but was he just having engine trouble or something?
Yeah, he was running out of. He was pushing the fuel as far as he could go, and he had to land somewhere. And he was ferrying this general or some high-ranking official. And the guy was like, sweating, and but he landed the plane, and it kind of cemented that that reputation as being a little bit crazy. But yeah, great story, and it's true on the Autobahn of all things, man.
He seemed like he was a very good storyteller, just from interviews.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Jimmy was. Last time I saw him, he was not well, and
Yeah.
I met his son Chris a few times, and I'm glad he's kind of continuing Scotty in some form, which is great.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite guest that you've had, an interview that you've had over the years, specifically Star Trek, but even if it's not Star Trek?
Well, it would have to be Leonard because Spock was what meant a lot to me because I'm Cuban and I kind of know what it's like to kind of live in two different cultures. And I gravitated towards Spock. And I told him that, because of that. And, he says that he's had so many people throughout the years come up to him and tell him, how they are accepted. And it really applies to anybody that's trying to navigate their own culture and translating it to the American culture.
Yeah.
So he was very helpful. So what I do is I incorporate the best of each, and it works.
That's great. So were you born in Cuba, or?
I was born there. Yeah.
When did you move over to the States?
We came in 1961. It took about 2 years.
Okay.
And then we lived in New Jersey. Never saw snow before, but I did then. And then educated here, and it's been. I love this country very much, and and I love the values that Star Trek has. The IDIC is very important to me. I actually have a small IDIC as well, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. So that philosophy and is very, very important, and I believe in it very strongly.
Yeah. So is that what makes, in your opinion, is that what makes Star Trek so long lived? I mean, what has kept that legacy alive? Because suddenly we're in another golden age of Star Trek where there's 5 series or whatever in production.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? This little show from the 60s, from 1966, is known worldwide and is still going on more than 55 years later.
Yeah, honestly, there's 2 reasons. First, it's what I call the big 3: Spock, McCoy, and Kirk. McCoy was always the heart. Spock is the logic, obviously, and Kirk is kind of the adventurer who will take risks. And that combination, they almost like they made one person. It was really interesting. Their friendship and love for each other was very evident throughout the series. And then the diversity. I can tell you that I remember watching an episode. It was in reruns years later, and things were not so good racially in the United States. In City on the Edge of Forever, it's a very brief scene. An African-American crew member walks on the bridge, and then Kirk follows him, and he goes to his station, and Kirk goes to the command chair. And it just something clicked inside of me. It's like, wow, that's like no big deal. And it was like, yeah, that's what Star Trek is all about as well. And I love exploration. I was an Apollo fan during, and actually Gemini, Apollo, and when I was growing up, and those meant a lot to me. And seeing Dr. Mae Jensen on Next Generation was really cool. So yeah, it's all those things, and then it just strikes an emotional chord with me. The stories, really good allegories. The best ones were when Kirk has a decision to make, that's a moral decision. Those are the best episodes. And
give me your opinion. What makes a good podcast interview? As I guess it's more of a general question. I mean,
yeah,
Star Trek insights as well. But what are you looking for? How do you make your guests feel comfortable? How do you go about that whole process?
Well, really, a lot of it is looking at their backgrounds, first of all, doing a little research, and also watching what they're in currently. And I'm a positive person, so I point out positives about their performance. if there's a key scene or something that moved me, I will mention that to them. And but really, it's just knowing who they are and having an understanding how they approach the craft and what it takes to be an actor, and also the production side. The people always ask in interviews, um, what for a television example, what's challenging for you? Television is always challenging. You're working long hours, and you're doing multiple takes, so it's always a challenge.
Yeah.
But I always like to approach them as far as approaching the character. What about this person that you like? What is it you don't like about them? And usually you strike up a rapport, and you also have to. Johnny Carson said this years ago. You have to be a good listener. So you might have prepared questions, but if they take you on another path, you know, just a great example was I spoke to Michael Dorn, last year, and we just got off on this wonderful tangent about westerns. He loves westerns, and we just started talking about it. And he wants to do a pilot, western. But so yeah, it was a passion of his, and you get to talk to him about what they do. Of course, if it's a Star Trek interview, you want to talk about Star Trek too. But there's ways of doing it it's very nonchalant, even if they're promoting something else. So it's really a lot of those things. And if you consider yourself an expert, you're not. I can tell you that right now. It's like I'm not an expert interviewer. I'm working on it constantly. If you ever get to the point where I don't need to work on that, then you're dead. I remember seeing a television host once interviewing a famous author. He obviously never read the book. And he was talking about restaurants in San Francisco. And it was painful to watch because the guy was so wrapped up in himself that he kind of ignored what the guest wanted to talk about. And that's really it. Your guest is exactly that, your guest. And you treat them like a guest. And you also have to respect what they do and do something that not everybody can do, whether it's in front of the camera or behind. So that's kind of like the rules I try to live by.
Do you have a favorite Star Trek series? I suspect I know the answer to this. And separately, do you have a favorite modern Star Trek series? If your favorite series is not modern.
I love the original series. That's what got me hooked, and it's just holds up very well. That first season of Star Trek was probably some of the finest television, with maybe a few examples where it wasn't as good, but really only one episode I can think of. But other than that, it was just amazing television and just really good writing. Thanks to the unsung hero, Gene L. Kuhn, who was so amazing. Created the Klingons. I mean, he did so much. He wrote Errand of Mercy, and that's the first look at the Klingons, and he created them. So yeah, I mean, it was just that. Modern series, boy, that's hard because I really like them all. I would say Discovery is excellent. Also, for the kids, Prodigy is wonderful. It shows people working together. It's from different backgrounds, and I love that. And Lower Decks. Honestly, I had problems at first, and I told Mike Mahan about that. But I kind of started to warm up, and I love all the Easter eggs in there. Oh my God, it's so funny the way they use them. So I really have warmed up to the show and love it for its own thing. I don't, and Star Trek Picard. Hopefully, I'll be able to. They will have a press junket, and I hope to attend that and cover that, and record that as well. So, yeah, it'd be great to, after being in the roundtables with all the Next Generation cast all those years, except for Gates McFadden. For First Contact, she had her appendix out.
Oh no!
Yeah, she didn't make it, so she was not there. But but the rest of them were. And Alfre Woodard and James Cromwell would just. Alfre Woodard lit up the room when she walked in. She was amazing. Just really good stuff.
Did you go to journalism school?
No, I was a communications major and worked at the college radio station, but we're not doing interviews. I was a DJ, and I was going to go into that part of my career, but and I did it for a while, and then I just said, "Oh, this is too much traveling," and it's like I want to have a life, so I just decided not to, and kind of worked in corporate television for a while, and then radio, and started doing. I was going through a life-changing moment, and it was like, what do I want to do? And Sci-Fi Talk popped into my head, and started talking to people, and it's been going ever since. And I'm really glad. I mean, the Star Trek people alone I've met is it's amazing. It really has been amazing, and God, all these almost 56 years. It's incredible.
I know.
It's really incredible. But yeah, it's been fun. But interview wise, I kind of learned on the fly. I would critique myself and see what I was doing right and wrong, and some of the old stuff I listen to and I go, oh, but like I said, I'm still working at it.
Yeah.
I talked to Larry Nemechek about his Trek Files podcast when it first came on, and there's talk about finding some really obscure gold. I mean, memos and scripts, and it's just like, oh my God. He just did a thing. I think it was the assistant to Gene L. Kuhn, I think was on one of his Portal 47.
I had him too. She was one of my first ones. Andrea Kindred.
Yes, yeah. I gotta listen to that because I love Gene Kuhn's work, and
she was fascinating. She was really interesting. She just came out with a book.
Oh, good.
So and about that whole time, it's called From Slavery to Star Trek. There's actually two. There's a big book that's like her whole history and her family's history and all that, called Code Switching, and then it has a subtitle. I'm not sure what. From Slavery to Star Trek is specifically the stuff related to Star Trek from that book. So it's basically it's excerpts of that book taken out. That's specifically about Gene L. Kuhn and all of that.
Oh, nice. Yes. Oh, wow. That's something. That's quite a story. Anything that ties to the original series is always special to me.
Yeah. I just did an interview with Julie Nimoy and her husband David. That just came out this week.
Nice.
And it was really great. She was really interesting. He was really interesting. They talked a lot about their film Remembering Leonard Nimoy.
Yes.
And we talked a lot about his last days. And they're working on a film about Gene Wilder, who it turns out was a good friend of Leonard's.
Oh, wow.
So that should come out later this year, hopefully, maybe in the summer. So it was really interesting.
I love Gene Wilder.
Yeah.
The producers and Blazing Saddles. I mean, God, if he did nothing else, I would just love him anyway.
Me too.
And his movies with Richard Pryor were hysterical.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just a comic genius. He really, he was just amazing.
Yeah, he was great. I loved him. So I'm excited to see that film.
Yes.
They do mainly things that tie into a medical issue. And I think he died of Alzheimer's, so that's how they're tying it in.
Yeah.
David, when he started dating Julie, he didn't know that this was 10 or 11 years ago. He didn't know that she was Leonard Nimoy's son. He didn't realize. And he was working on microbiology, I think, film. And so she sort of came on board as sort of his producer and helped him out with it and said, how would you like my father to narrate? So he's got Leonard Nimoy narrating this film. And that's where their partnership began. And they've been making films like that ever since.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's so cool.
yeah, it's
That's a
really
great
cool.
story. Yeah,
Yeah.
Leonard Nimoy could read the phone book and I'd listen. You know,
Yep, absolutely.
he
Uh,
had that wonderful voice. I used to love In Search of too, as a matter of fact. I used to watch
yeah,
that.
In Search of was great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
did a
yeah,
great job. So
yeah.
yeah,
He was a really great actor.
he's definitely an icon. And boy, his God, if he, it would have been wonderful to have seen him on some of the newer shows too. So,
Yeah,
with time travel, they could have even appeared on Strange New Worlds somehow.
sure.
See, those two Spocks together would have been cool.
That
So,
would have been really cool.
Ethan's doing a great job too, by the way. I really love his Spock.
Yeah, I agree. I think his arc is correct for Spock, and when he first showed up in Discovery to now, I think you really see how Spock became Spock.
Yes.
Know him, yeah.
Yeah. I love the short treks too. They're fantastic.
Oh, they're so good. I wish
Yeah.
we do more. I'm missing them.
Yeah,
I'm
me too.
sure they just have a production schedule that won't allow for it anymore. They were really just to fill time until we got a second season of Discovery. But
Yeah, now they're in, I mean, we're going from one series to another now. So I mean
yeah,
it's
yeah,
but it doesn't feel like that it's too much. It feels like it's spaced out just enough.
yeah,
And obviously, Paramount Plus has done very well as a result of Star Trek. So
sure, yeah,
I think their membership just like quadrupled after Discovery season one. So I can
right.
only imagine as word gets out. But I'm also glad that Nickelodeon is running Prodigy because I think kids should see that and should not be blocked from seeing that. So
I agree.
that's
Yeah,
a wonderful idea. And it's always great to hear John Noble. I talked to him when he was on Fringe. So
yeah. I love.
I was at the last Fringe roundtable in San Diego Comic Con,
Oh
and
wow.
so I was saying goodbye, and it was like one of the actors, just kind of looked at me, and he saw that I was, it was like, hey, that's it, and he goes, yeah, I know, but everything comes to an end, and it
Yeah,
does.
sure. Yeah, all good things, as they say.
All good things. Hardest part of my job is when you get to the end and there's nothing new to cover. I just did that with The Walking Dead, at least in that incarnation. I was there at the very beginning and then at the end after, God, almost 11 years out of my life.
Wow.
But really, yeah, it's a little bittersweet. But you look at the work and the work is good. So
Yeah.
that's what's going to endure.
So I wanted to talk to you about sadly your wife's aunt passed away recently. And I
Yes.
talked to Jonathan Frakes a few months ago about pancreatic cancer, and I know you've
Yeah.
talked to him about that as well.
Yeah.
Would you share your wife's aunt's story? What is that?
Hmm.
In-law?
Yeah. Yeah. It was. She was diagnosed with stage 4, and that was tough. However, she was actually at first responding to treatment, and she was doing well. And recently, she had a problem. I think it was related, maybe, excuse me, to her kidney or or something like that. Pardon me. And they actually had to do a procedure, and then they ended up doing the procedure. But then she just got worse and eventually had to go into hospice, and that's where she passed. Apparently, she was in a lot of pain in the last few months and went through a lot. So, as Jonathan and I talked about, and Armin too, early detection is so key, and really, it's really the best way to stop it. And as I said earlier, if anybody in your family, has it or has had it, then definitely get tested. It's a very simple test, and but yeah, it's a great organization. We talked about when they were doing, they had on November 17th, they had a live event. They had doctors, survivors. I mean, talking a lot of really useful information. And the website, when I posted that on Twitter, PanCan reached out to me and said, "Look, if you need somebody to talk to, it was very generous of them. It's a excellent organization, and you mentioned the Purple Stride, and that is an event that when I talked to Armin, he was actually doing a play, so he couldn't walk with the others, but he said he was in Kansas City, so he was going to um, see if their local chapter and walk with them. He was doing the play that ends up wrong or goes wrong.
The play that goes wrong. Yeah. He and I
Yeah,
talked
so he was
about
doing
that
that.
when I talked to him. Yeah.
Yeah, so gifted actor, really gifted actor.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's a very terrible disease. I lost a grandfather to mouth cancer so years ago, and he never even saw me graduate 8th grade. So that's how long ago it was. And so I mean, cancer. It's one of my favorite all-time football coaches died of colon cancer. So it's they have made incredible strides in the last few years, and they're continuing the research to hopefully eradicate this. So I'm hopeful as science gets better, then these cures I think will come a lot faster. So
yeah,
so it's devastating disease, and she went through a lot at the end, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can imagine. I had an aunt that I lost to breast cancer when I was, and they've made a lot of progress in breast cancer since then. So it's a tough disease, and it touches everybody.
It sure does.
Yeah. Anybody watching this should go to pancan.org and donate and watch for the Purple Stride, which is a walk, which I'm hoping to have some more on that later in the year. It happens in April, I believe. So
they'll be posted on the website there.
Yeah.
And I think you can even support some of the people walking. And
Yeah.
of course you can donate there as well.
And there's a Star Trek group, so they're sort of a little competitive, the groups. So
good.
So if you want to support the Star Trek group, it'll have Jonathan Frakes and Armin Shimmerman and Kitty Swink, and I don't know who else involved. So that it's a good cause, and you can get if you go to our website, our homepage has a link to the donation page.
There you go. So there you go. Fantastic. No, I'm very gratified at the work they're doing, and having somebody like Jonathan and Armin and Kitty too really involved gives it a lot of star power. And I mean, Jonathan lost his brother, and that must have been tough.
Yeah.
And as he told me, he was the kind of guy you can call in the middle of the night if you had any problems. So, I mean, that makes it even more devastating to have somebody with a soul like that pass away. So this is a horrible disease, and I'd love to see it eradicated.
What else you want to talk about, Tony?
Well, we covered a lot. I guess really just looking forward to the rest of Picard. Always good to see Patrick. We actually saw him. I guess 2 or 3 years ago. He did. We sat in the very first row. He did A Christmas Carol in New York.
Oh, cool!
It was a benefit for a theater. So yeah, we paid a little money, but it was for a good cause, and we sat in the very first row, and he did all the characters, and something he's been doing for years, but I've never seen it live, and he was magnificent. Oh my God!
I saw it on the original Broadway run.
Oh, nice.
My family and I went down and saw it, and he's just so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, with his Shakespearean background, and if I would love to corner him and just talk Shakespeare for a whole half hour or an hour, I think that'd be awesome.
Me too. That's basically what I did with Armin when I talked to Armin. It was
cool.
All about Shakespeare. But
yeah, you have two things that I really love: Shakespeare and Sherlock Holmes. I think.
I'm big fans of both of those things.
Oh my God! I mean,
there's a crossover, I think, between Star Trek fans and those things in particular.
Yes,
why do you think that is? I've always wondered.
I mean, I know Leonard played Sherlock Holmes on Broadway. And
Absolutely.
obviously, there's could Sherlock be a little bit of an inspiration for Spock? Definitely for his logic,
Yeah,
um, and also, I think that has a lot to do with it. But yeah, Sherlock Holmes. I my favorites have got to be Basil Rathbone to start, and really, I think the quintessential Holmes was Jeremy Brett.
I agree.
And
My favorite.
if you watch the episode The Solitary Cyclist, I believe all of the dialogue is from the story, which was amazing.
Yeah,
But I saw him, he captured every nuance of Holmes, and he had two Dr. Watsons, and I like Sir Hardwick, who was second. And
yeah,
of course, his father's a famous actor as well.
right.
But yeah, I loved it, and man, I'd like to get my hands on that DVD collection because it's hard to find where it's shown these days.
Yeah, I mean, you can get it on BritBox.
BritBox, okay.
Yeah. Or you can get, I mean, I have the Blu-rays.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. That was a
Yeah,
big one for me growing
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Really
And I
loved it.
agree. The dialogue, especially when it's taken directly from the stories, dialogue is so strong anyway, because
Yes.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was, he was just a master at that.
Hmm.
But then Jeremy Brett took that dialogue
Yeah.
and made it his own and made
Hmm.
it better, which is
Yes.
not easy to do because it's so good to begin with. He made some really interesting choices, I thought.
I thought so too. Those were very special series, and in those days, I videotaped all of them on VHS, and I would watch them
Huh?
over and over again. And
Yeah,
I actually loved their version of Hound of the Baskervilles too. I thought they did an excellent job.
yeah, me too.
Ian Richardson gets an honorable mention too. I thought he did just those two films, The
Yeah,
Hound and The Sign of Four.
yeah,
But he gets an honorable mention. He
yeah,
kind of leans more towards the Basil Rathbone interpretation, I thought.
right. Yeah,
But I liked it.
which I don't
Sure.
mind. It's
No,
not
I
like
don't mind either.
Jeremy Brett is my favorite.
Yeah, I would say so. So
Yeah.
yeah. What was the other thing you mentioned? I kind of lost
Shakespeare.
Oh, Shakespeare. Well, we know Roddenberry liked it. He named episodes
Right,
Conscience of the King
right.
by any other name.
Yeah,
And Conscience of the King, Barbara Anderson actually recites lines from that.
yeah. I love
And
that episode
that's a great episode.
because I love mysteries and I love
Yeah.
Shakespeare. So, and that's got it all.
Yeah.
So, and I love Star
Absolutely.
Trek. So,
Yeah. Oh, Shakespeare is great. I've actually been to Stratford on Avon.
why? Yeah,
And at the time they had all the costumes from all the BBC productions and in display in City Hall, and I toured that. And then I went to the church where he's buried, and I saw the Globe Theater there, or where the Shakespeare Festival has
yeah.
their thing. And I actually talked to Alice Krieger about that a little bit when I
Oh,
talked to her recently. Well, she really gave me some great insights on the Board Queen too.
yeah,
Really, she
yeah,
understood her really well. I thought
yeah,
great. She did an excellent job playing her.
yeah,
But yeah, Shakespeare is man, love it.
yeah. Me too. I've done a lot of Shakespeare.
Wow,
And not as an actor, but as a stage manager.
wow, yeah.
For a while, I was going up to Westerly, Rhode Island, and doing Shakespeare in the Park.
Oh, fantastic!
And the first summer I did it, David Burney was in the production,
Wow.
who was in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine as a Romulan,
Yes,
and was married to Meredith Baxter Burney
of course. Yeah.
for a while, and they did a show.
Bridget Loves Bernie.
Bridget Loves Bernie, right? Yes.
I used to attend when I was living in New Jersey. I would go to the Shakespeare Festival at Drew University a lot.
Oh yeah, sure.
And whenever they did Shakespeare, before I was married, after I was married, I would go and just see the plays because I love the language and plots and everything. I think we saw Midsummer Night's Dream too.
Okay.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites because it's pure fantasy.
Yeah.
I love,
Yeah.
And I guess you can say The Tempest is science fiction. You can say that.
Yeah. You
That was
could.
kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
that was kind of like the basis of Forbidden Planet. So
Right.
why not?
Right.
which could have been a Star Trek episode anyway.
Right. Yeah, it could. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it was a precursor to Star Trek. I mean, there's a lot that you think, oh, they stole this from Star Trek, but they didn't because it was 10 years
Yeah.
before Star Trek.
Yeah, Robbie the robot is one
Yeah.
of my favorites. And
Yeah.
ironically, the gentleman who designed the phasers and tricorders designed Robbie and the Lost in Space robot. He was a Japanese
Oh,
gentleman.
yeah.
And, so they got him on board because he had worked on those projects.
Yeah.
And you know the story about Spock's ears, don't you? And
I think so, but tell it. Yeah.
well, they were Fred Phillips, which is the wonderful makeup artist, whose daughter Jaina, by the way, worked on the Klingon makeup for motion picture, doing Mark Leonard and those folks with the ridge, the controversial ridges at the time. But anyway, Fred Phillips was doing Spock's ears. They couldn't get it right. It just didn't look right. So he contacted a colleague, John Chambers, who won the Academy Award for Planet of the Apes. So essentially, John took a fresh mold of Leonard's ears and then started, mass producing them, because they would go through on a long day, probably about 3 or 4, maybe even as many as 5 pairs of ears that they had to keep gluing and re-gluing on Leonard. So anyway, he did the ears, and the rest is history. So, and if you look at the movie ears compared to the Star Trek TV ears, the ears were bigger on television. The ears got smaller because it was a big screen anyway. You didn't need to make them big.
Right.
It was interesting.
Yeah. Very cool.
There's Spock ears floating around somewhere, I'm sure.
Yep. So I asked Julie if she had gotten to try them on. She said no, but my brother did.
Yeah. You've seen that famous blooper where Adam Nimoy shows up on the bridge of the Enterprise when Spock's on the bridge, sitting in the captain's chair, and Adam walks in and he goes, "Hello, Daddy," and it just breaks everybody up.
Yes.
It's hysterical. And years later, he directed him in their version of iRobot on the Outer Limits, which was
Adam cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Adam directed him on that, and
that's very cool.
That's one of the few times father and son worked together.
Yeah,
and you know who his wife is now, don't you? Adam's wife.
Adam's wife? No, I don't think so.
Well, he married Terry Farrell.
Oh, that's right. I did know that. Yes, I did hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's such a interconnected universe with so many things. But
so funny.
It's neat. It's neat. Yeah, Spock's ears. That's a famous story. I remember The World of Star Trek. I think there was a book by Stephen A. Whitfield about Inside Star Trek. I think it was called.
Yeah, Inside Star Trek. Sure.
And I devoured that. I learned how they shot. If they were on the bridge, they shot all the scenes on the bridge. And that's why Star Trek had continuity errors, because you'd see Kirk wearing a different tunic in the same episode. Wait a minute, he just went to the bridge with that tunic and he's coming on board with this one. What's going on here?
Quick change.
But Star Trek their big mistakes are continuity.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. This has been a pleasure and an honor. It was finally, you contacted me toward the end of last year, and it's taken till now to actually get something going. But I had not. I'm sort of at capacity with the podcasts I listen to, and often have to shuffle around and like drop some because there just aren't enough hours in the day.
I hear you.
I do a lot of podcasts, and I had seen Sci-Fi Talk floating around, and I was like, oh, that might be interesting, but I don't really have the capacity for another podcast. But after you contacted me, I started listening, and I love it. And
thank you. Very nice. Very humbly to hear that. It really is.
I've subscribed to it and have just been listening to it for the past 2 months, absorbing it because I'm really enjoying every episode something new. So,
that's good. It's good to hear that.
It's great for Star Trek fans, but it's great for fans of sci-fi, horror, fantasy, all of that. It is involved, and it's everything from comics to video games to movies. to TV shows. It's really, really a great podcast. So thank you for putting that out in the world. And
Oh,
I'm ashamed I didn't find it sooner.
that's okay. I'm working on that end of it. I need to get the word out better. But thank you. It's the honor is mine to be on your podcast. I really appreciate it. And also I extend the invitation. I'd love to have you on mine.
I would love to be on yours. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, really. My
we,
pleasure and my honor to be here, really.
I appreciate it. We will talk again soon.
All right.
All
You
right.
too.
Take care, Tony.
You too.